I was conscripted into the conquered ring the same way most humans were back then. A debt I didn't choose, sold up a chain of brokers until it landed on a Keith Raleigh ledger with my name stamped wrong. By the time I learned to spell it the way they wanted, I had already won enough fights to be issued a cord. The cord went around my left wrist, and every confirmed kill in the ring earned a bead. Fired clay, the size of a knuckle, glazed the color of whatever territory you'd taken the life in. Mine ran red, brown, and slate gray, the colors of two arenas I'd rather not describe. 9 beads by the time of the hollow cycle. 9 lives the league said belonged to my account. I never asked for the cord, and I never tried to take it off either. Refusing it would have meant refusing the league's only proof that I was worth keeping fed, housed, and alive between bouts. And a debt conscript who couldn't be proven worth keeping didn't stay a conscript for long. So I wore it the way you wear a uniform you didn't choose, visible, accurate, and never once mistaken for who I actually was. I learned the Keith Raleigh by watching how carefully they handled their own beads. A clan elder would run a thumb across someone's cord during a greeting, counting without seeming to count, and adjust how much room he gave that person at a table accordingly. Children were given empty cords at birth, blank and waiting, the way some cultures hand a newborn a name. Nobody in 4,000 years had thought to ask what happened to a person who lost and somehow kept breathing, because the question had never had a reason to exist. The Keith Raleigh built their whole civilization on accounts like that. Standing wasn't inherited, it was tallied. A warrior who lost was diminished in the public record, and a warrior diminished too many times stopped being invited to fight at all, which, in their language, was a longer word for dying slowly instead of quickly. Mercy didn't exist in their grammar. There wasn't a clean way to say it. The closest word translated to theft of a deserved ending. Once a cycle, on the anniversary of the founding compact that first bound 100 warring Keith Raleigh clans into one league instead of 100 separate wars, they ran the hollow cycle. One full match day where killing was suspended by treaty law older than the ring itself. The fights still happened. The standings still moved. But no bead could be earned, because no life could legally end. The clans called it revelry. It was the one day a year their whole bloody economy held its breath. I drew Vithra Saul for my hollow cycle bout. She was young by Keith Raleigh years, fast in a way that made the crowd lean forward, and she had never lost a recorded match. I watched her warm up across the sand and understood, the way you understand weather, that she had built her entire self around that fact. An unbroken record was the only kind of name the Keith Raleigh trusted. I broke it in under 4 minutes. Not cleanly, she fought like something that refused the idea of an ending right up until the ending arrived, but cleanly enough that the arbiter called it before either of us drew real blood. Hollow cycle rules. No kill permitted, no kill scored. Just a loss, plain and public, the first of her life, broadcast to every clan watching. She didn't get up. I crossed the sand to check on her, the way I'd been trained to in case the truce had a loophole I didn't know about. She wasn't hurt. She was lying flat on her back with her eyes open, breathing hard, staring up at the dome glass and the daylight coming through it. And when I crouched beside her, she said, in the flat administrative Keith Raleigh they use for facts rather than feelings, "Finish it." "Truce day," I said, "no kills scored." "I am aware of the law." She still hadn't moved. "I am asking you to break it." I told her I wasn't going to do that, and she told me in that same flat voice exactly what was waiting for her instead. A loss on the hollow cycle didn't fade by morning. It stayed on the public ledger forever, dated and witnessed. The one match every clan archive would keep pulled up beside her name for the rest of her career, proof that on the one-day killing didn't count. She still couldn't win. The Keith Raleigh had no ritual for losing without dying. They had built 4,000 years of law around the assumption that nobody would need one. She wasn't asking me to kill her because she wanted to die. She was asking because her own civilization had never given her another way to survive what had just happened to her. I sat back on my heels and looked at her a while. Then I unhooked the cord from my left wrist. I want to be clear that I didn't know in that moment whether what I was about to do would mean anything at all under their law. I only knew the law had a hole in it the size of a single sentence, a hole nobody had ever needed to fill, because nobody had ever lost on hollow cycle and lived to need it filled. I worked one bead loose from the cord. Slate gray, the oldest one I had, taken in my second year in the ring. I took her wrist, she let me, which told me more than anything she'd said, and I threaded that bead onto the bare cord she wore for standing rather than for kills, and I tied it off the way I'd seen Keith Raleigh quartermasters do it 100 times. That's not a kill bead, I told her. That's mine. I'm putting it on your ledger instead of mine. She stared at the bead like it had said something to her directly. There is no clause for a bead changing accounts. A bead is evidence of a life taken. You cannot give evidence of a thing that did not happen. Then it's not evidence, I said. It's a debt. I'm telling you I owe you one. Today, on the day the kill wasn't allowed to count, I'm saying the loss didn't happen either, just the debt. She didn't answer for a long time. Around us, other hollow cycle bouts kept finishing in the daylight, none of it touching us, the dome glass throwing long gold light across the sand. An arbiter had drifted closer, the way arbiters do when something happens on the sand that isn't in their procedure, and stood there not intervening because there was nothing in the procedure to intervene with. Eventually Vithra sat up, looked at the bead on her wrist, looked at the 8 remaining on mine, and said, very quietly, that she did not know what category of thing had just happened to her, and that the not knowing frightened her more than losing had. I told her that was probably fair. I didn't have a better word for it either. Where I came from, we had 100 half-useful phrases for this. Owe you one, I've got you. Were square, small currencies people traded in every day without anyone keeping a ledger of it, because the ledger was never the point. I didn't try to explain that to her on the sand. It would have sounded like I was claiming my own people had solved something hers hadn't, and that wasn't true. We just had a different word for the same stubborn fact. Sometimes a debt is worth more held than collected. What I hadn't accounted for was that an arbiter's recorder had been close enough to catch the whole exchange on its ledger feed, because everything in the ring gets recorded whether you want it to or not. By the time I was back in the conscript barracks that evening, 3 different clan archivists had already filed formal queries asking what legal category a transferred bead belonged to, because their law had no answer and their law liked having answers. It took the League Council the better part of a season to settle on language. They didn't call it mercy. That word still doesn't exist cleanly in Keith Raleigh, and I don't think it ever will. What they settled on translates roughly to carried loss. A debt one fighter can choose to hold on another's behalf instead of letting the ledger close it the old way. It isn't generous by their own admission. It's a liability. The fighter who carries it can be called to answer for it later, in ways nobody had fully worked out yet when I left the ring 2 seasons after that. My contract finally bought out by money I never asked where it came from. Vithra Saul still fights. I've watched the broadcast from outside, the way you watch something you helped happen without ever fully understanding what it was you did. She still has that bead. She wears it separate from her own cord now, on a second cord by itself, because the League still hasn't decided what string it's supposed to live on. I don't know if what I did changed anything beyond the 2 of us. The hollow cycle still runs once a year. The beads still get earned the old way the other 364 days. But I know that somewhere in a 4,000-year-old body of law that never had a word for what I did, there's now a clause with my name nowhere on it, and a slate-gray beads description written into it instead. And every season since, a handful of other fighters have asked, quietly, whether they're allowed to do what I did. The council still hasn't told them no.